This video is going to focus on ordering decimals. Now, if you've watched my video on comparing decimals, you'll notice that this is very similar. When we order decimals, though, we have more than two options. Or I shouldn't say options, we have more than two decimals to work with. So with comparing, we were just saying, oh, what's bigger? 7/10 or 3/10? But now with ordering decimals, we're going to have at least a third option where we have to figure out what's the smallest, what's the next smallest, and then what's the largest. And the way to do this is very similar to comparing them. Start by looking at your different place values. We got in our ones place, we have a 0, and a 0. So our ones place value isn't going to help us to order them. Let's look at the next place value, our tenths. We've got a 7, we've got a 3, and we have a 5. Now, the order that we put them in all depends on, are we ordering them from least to greatest, or are we going from greatest to least? If we're going to go from least to greatest, we want to find the smallest number to start off with. So in our tenths place, we had a 7, we had a 3, and a 5. So which one is the smallest number? Hopefully you're going to say 3/10. So we can take 3/10 and we can put it all the way to the left, because usually if we're going from least to greatest, we want to go from left to right, just like we're reading a book. Now we're left with 0 and 7/10 and 0 and 5/10. We had the 7 and we had the 5. What is the next smallest number? Hopefully you agree that it is 0 and 5/10. So we can take that one next, which means our 0 and 7/10 is the biggest, and now we have them in order from least to greatest. 3/10 is the smallest, 5/10 is the next smallest, or the next biggest, and then 7/10 is the largest decimal that we have. If we wanted to go from greatest to least, well, we could just reverse the order. I would take my 7/10 and put that all the way at the left side, because we're going from greatest to least. Since we only have three options, this one's going to stay the same. 5/10 is still going to stay in the middle, and then 3/10 is going to end up going over on the far right, because we're going from our biggest number to our smallest number. Let's try with a different set of decimals this time. This time I've given us 4 decimals to work with, and I'm going to say we want to go from greatest to least. We want to start with our largest decimal and end up with our smallest decimal. So, just like before, we start by taking a look at our place values. Look at our ones place value. We have a 0, we have a 1, we have a 0, and we have a 0. Since we're going from greatest to least, we want to choose the decimal that had the biggest place value in that ones place. Well, that would be 1 and 42/100. So that is going to be our largest place value, and that's going to be our largest decimal. So it's going to go all the way over onto the left. Now we need to look at locate our next biggest. This was the largest, but we need to find the one that's next biggest. So, once again, look at our place values. 0 in the ones, 0 in the ones, 0 in the ones. So they're all the same. That's not going to help us at all. So we need to go to our tenths. We have a 3 in the tenths, we have a 3 in the tenths, and we have a 7 in the tenths. 7 is bigger than either of those 3's, so our next largest is going to be 7/10. And I can put that right next to it, because we're going from, once again, greatest to least. Now for our last option, or shouldn't say last, our next decimal, we have 3/10 and we have 3/10, so they're the same, but this one has a 5 in the hundredths. Now if you remember from last time, we can always put a 0 at the end of our decimal. It doesn't matter how many zeros we put in there, as long as all we add is a 0. If we add a 0, it doesn't change our value. It just goes from 3/10 to 30/100. hundredths, which is the same value as 3/10. So, if I'm comparing our hundredths now, I have a 0 and I have a 5. 5 is bigger than 0, so this will be our next largest decimal. And then lastly, since it's the last one that we have, 0 and 3/10 or 30 hundredths, you can keep the 0 or get rid of it, it doesn't matter, is going to be our smallest decimal. And there we have it. We've ordered these 4 decimals from greatest to least. And all it took was comparing each of our place values, our ones, then our tenths, and then for the last 2, our hundredths, to discover what is the largest, what is the smallest. Alright, try this next one on your own. Once again, I've given us 4 decimals, and this time we want to go from least to greatest. So you're going to try this one on your own. Discover what is the smallest decimal, what's the next smallest, what's the second biggest, and then what is the largest or the greatest. Go ahead, pause the video, and good luck. As you were working on this, I hope you use the method I've been showing you, which is comparing our place values. We want the least first, so look at our ones. We've got a 2, we've got a 0, we have a 1, and we have a 0. Well, 0 is smaller than 1 and 2, so we know that this decimal or this decimal is going to be our smallest or our least value. So we don't have to worry about these two at the moment. Now let's look at our tenths place. We've got a 7 and we've got a 2. 2 is smaller than 7, so we're going to put this one first. It doesn't matter that it's 295 thousandths. The fact that this 2 in the tenths is less than this 7 in the tenths makes this the smallest decimal that we have. So this is going to be our first in our order of least to greatest. And if this is first and we were comparing it to this decimal, this one must be second. So this is going to be our second smallest. And that's a comma. So now we're left with 2 and 459 thousandths and 1 and 86 hundredths. Let's compare those ones place values again. We have a 2 and we have a 1. 1 is smaller than 2, so this is going to be our second biggest decimal. So I can move it all the way over to our third place. And lastly, 2 and 459 thousandths is going to be the largest or the greatest decimal that we have to work with. So it becomes our last number in our order from least to greatest. So there you have it. By comparing our place values, ones, tenths, hundredths, maybe even thousandths, we can order any decimal from greatest to least, or in this case, least to greatest. Hope you found this helpful, and good luck.